Good evening, everybody. Yes. It's so good to be gathered again in person, right? And it's such an important topic we get to talk about tonight. I'm really glad to be here. My name's Amalia Martino. I am the founder and president of the Vita Agency. We're a full-service multicultural communications company. We say at TVA that we speak human. We believe that by centering the experiences of those underserved helps improve outcomes and processes for all of us. We're just up on 3rd. You know, Claire's Ombu Salon, we're right there, big blue sign, you can't miss us. Come say hi anytime. So, in addition to being a business owner, I'm also a member of the Edmonds community and a mom. I'm also the only person of color in my very conservative and blue-collar family. I have spent a lifetime literally having really tough conversations, really meaningful conversations, sometimes painful conversations to bridge understanding. I really live for this stuff, and I could not be more honored to be here with you today. I am also really thrilled to welcome Monica to Edmonds. I get to do this. I'm so excited. Monica Guzman is a Latina. She's a dual citizen of US and Mexico, and she lives in Seattle with her husband and 2 kids. She is also the proud liberal daughter of conservative parents. I get it. I get it, girl. And in my opinion, she is a badass who does really, really brave work. Monica's a bridge builder, a journalist, and entrepreneur. Her new book, I Never Thought of It That Way, How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times, was named New York Times recommended read and has garnered acclaim across the political spectrum. I mean, girl. Monica is also the director of digital and storytelling at Braver Angels, the nation's largest cross-partisan grassroots organization working to depolarize America. Right? She's host of live interview series at Crosscut, co-founder of the award-winning Seattle newsletter, The Evergrey, and was named one of 50 most influential women in Seattle. Like I said, she's a badass. We're lucky to have her. So Monica has been a fellow at the Henry M. Jackson Foundation, as well as at Nieman Foundation of Journalism at Harvard University, where she researched how journalists can rethink their role to better meet the needs of an engaged public. I mean, there's no better time for this conversation. I have been aware of Monica's work for years, and I know tonight will be very enlightening. I also want to thank Edmonds Citizen of the Year, Teresa Whipple, for inviting me to be part of tonight's agenda. As y'all know, Teresa is a leading member of the local business community and has played a critical role in bringing us all together for many important conversations just like this. She is a committed journalist and the founder of My Neighborhood News Network, which helps us all stay informed about what's happening in our community. Thank you, Teresa. There is no better way to start the year than us being here tonight. And with that, please help me welcome to the stage Teresa Whipple and Monica Guzman.
Welcome to Edmonds.
It's so cool to be here. Hi, everyone.
And thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. It's my pleasure to have Monica here. And, you know, we have known each other for a while. We sat on a panel together, on a journalism panel a few years ago. And when I heard she had written this book, I Never Thought of It That Way, my first thought was, I have to bring her here because, as many of you know who have read our publications, we have a lot of interesting comments, and people don't always agree.
And some of those were on the
slideshow,
right?
In fact, that was exactly all of those comments were comments maybe from some of you in this room who were not always disagreeing with each other. So Monica was gracious enough to come. We're thrilled to have her. And I would like to start out with the obvious question. And first, a caveat. We agreed before we started that we were not going to talk so much about the problem, because I think we all know what the problem is. We really want to talk tonight about solutions. and ways that we can communicate better. So let's start with why, in a nutshell, you wrote the book.
Yeah, there's a few threads. One is professional, having been a journalist, and you can probably relate to this. I take very seriously what I consider a personal mission to help people understand each other. How difficult that can be, how nuanced, how complicated by the context, the situation, the communities are in. And I realized, embarrassingly late, that journalism is this opportunity to have the kinds of conversations that have become somewhat endangered. Conversations of understanding without judgment, right? When I interview my sources, I'm there hoping that I can get them, understand them, and then explain some piece of who they are or why they do what they do to their community so that the whole system can be better informed. It's a really difficult thing to do when you're trying really hard to do it because it's your job. And it's particularly difficult when it's not your job. And you have all kinds of other things that you might want to get across in a conversation across disagreement. But maybe, well, I'll say one other thing. Another thread that led me to this book is, this is going to seem weird, but ever since I was a kid, my parents did one sort of unusual thing with us as a family, which is they always took me and my brother to the movies. So we went to the movies almost every single week. And I thought for years that that was normal. It's not normal. But one of the things I realized I learned is everybody has their reasons. A movie is really bad when you don't understand why people do what they do. Whether the character is tragic or heroic. If you don't know their motivations, and if you can't connect the dots, you can't relate to the movie, you can't relate to the plot, it sucks, right? So I sort of map that onto the world and I go, well, a lot of these things play like a bad movie because I don't know why they did that. But that doesn't mean they don't have their reasons. All it means is I don't know what they are. The personal reason I wrote this book has a lot to do with the moment we're in. And you mentioned that we all already know this problem. I'm sure, raise your hand if you've had some conversation across political disagreement that left you really anxious. Right? Some of you may have even, tense broken relationships because of it. I've talked with a lot of people in that position. The thing that did it for me was right after the 2016 election in Seattle, hanging out with a lot of my mostly liberal friends. I'm liberal blue myself, blue leaning. And hearing the conversation that was very tense and anxious sort of inevitably go to who is to blame. And in that moment, in that space, in that very blue city, right, the people to blame are the people who voted for Trump. But it was personal because they were talking about my parents. And they were saying some pretty horrible things and mapping them on to people that I love. And I know that those things are wrong. And that, I think, was the most animating force, where I thought, for some reason, my parents and I have been able to understand some things about each other on the other end of some pretty angry and intense conversations. So what's getting in our way? What can we learn about what it takes to do that?
Yeah, and I found your discussion about how you worked that through with your parents, and a particularly poignant moment when you talked about your father being afraid he wasn't going to be able to see his grandchildren because there was so much kind of tension in the air, right? And I'm sure that must have been a moment for you to think about.
Oh yeah, I don't know why. I just figured there's no way, even though things are tense, we'll figure it out. I'm sure my parents aren't really worried about any of that. So the day that he told me that, he has sort of a hard time being that sort of sensitive, I suppose, and emotional, so it really meant a lot. But he said it very gently, it was after a fight. It was actually on election day 2020. And he said, I've met some people who won't let their parents see their grandkids because of politics. And I just immediately looked at him and said, jamás, papa, like never. That is never gonna happen to us. It was like an impulse reaction. And that's, I don't know. It can seem so impossible. But
yeah,
that was my promise to him.
And I think a lot of us have been there. You spend part one of the book talking about why we're divided, and you talk about SOS, which I thought was a really easy way to remember, sorting, othering, and being in a silo. And then in part 2, you talk about a solution, which is asking the question, what am I missing? And how that relates to the title of the book. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. So the question, what am I missing, is the most important question we tend not to ask when we're confronted with a confounding disagreement. There's some beautiful things going on with that question. The most powerful is the assumption that's embedded within it. What am I missing assumes you're missing something. A lot of times in conversations of great disagreement, when things are at such high stakes and we are so convinced of our own point of view, we tend to make what I think of as sort of 3 big errors. We think the other person is crazy, stupid, or evil. If you start to think that in the course of a conversation, you've lost any kind of chance at the kind of understanding that makes real persuasion possible, for example. The kind of understanding that makes relationships work. The kind of understanding that allows this conversation to lead to the next one and to the next one. So that's it. What am I missing? You are probably missing something. Each of us right now in this room is wrong about something. The trick is we don't know what. And so the fact that we can converse and that we have this democracy, that's the magic, that's the experiment. But we have to keep that flow going. And what we need to do is to open that door in our mind and be intellectually humble, be able to say, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's another way to look at this. Maybe this person is not who I believe they are because of what they believe. Maybe there's a projection in my mind. I say that whoever is underrepresented in your life will be overrepresented in your imagination. So that's particularly important in a time like today when we are so sorted geographically and digitally into communities of shared interest and shared traits. It means that we have to hack around that a bit to make sure that we check what's in our imagination about people we don't know with actual reality.
Right, which brings me to the next question. You talked about in that same chapter about the importance of rejecting easy answers and embracing complexity, not always easy to do, and also mentioned that we need to have conversations, actual real conversations like you and I are having to increase understanding. But yet we have this social media world that seems to have the opposite effect on us. So do we need to get rid of Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram altogether, or is there a way to bridge that divide? You know I was going to ask that.
I know. Gosh, it's such a tough question because social media is getting a very bad rap these days for good reason. Even though it still holds the promise it had in the very beginning. I was a tech columnist when Facebook unleashed to college students, and people were still talking about pedophiles on MySpace and all of that. It was a very different era. But it has an incredible potential to connect us. Here's the thing. Social media platforms are about performance, and we now have more and more research to show this. On social media, there's one quality of good conversation that tends not to happen very well, which is something I call containment. Containment is the degree to which your conversation is contained to the people actually engaging in it. You know, if it's a one-on-one conversation, if it's a small group, there's a relationship between the more publicly open to an invisible mass audience your conversation is, the less candid the people in it are likely to be. The more likely they're going to perform perspectives instead of explore perspectives. The more likely they're going to be borrowing talking points that others have taken shelter under, right, as a sort of shield against whatever it is you're throwing at them. And then there's another thing, which is the internet is a non-place that makes us into non-people. We are not designed with our full arsenal of understanding tools in mind when we're talking as little avatars, and using text and maybe an emoji or two. You've probably noticed, I'm sure most of you use some form of social media, even text messaging, we can do this to ourselves. If you are skeptical, suspicious, or in any way sort of feeling negative toward whatever someone else digitally is saying or communicating, chances are, whatever they send you, you're gonna read it in a bad tone, right? That may not be the tone that they wrote, but that's the tone you read it. You literally give it your voice. There's a quote from the Talmud that things are not as they are, things are as we are. So that's the thing with social media, right? There's all these layers that keep us actually away from the entire picture of who we are and don't spark our curiosity about who we are, right? Like, oh, I like your necklace, or oh my gosh, wait, did you just come back from a trip? Like, tell me about so-and-so, whatever, right? These things that spark curiosity about us as people don't tend to show up on social media.
Right. And I think there was a point in your book when you were talking about how there are sometimes cues when you're conversing with somebody on Facebook or Twitter and you kind of tell that that conversation is not going anywhere, and then maybe there's a chance that you should take it offline.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Are there some kind of guides you would give for that?
Oh, absolutely. I think that one of the biggest mistakes that we make is we think that wherever a conversation starts is where it ought to stay. Says who? Really? No. Some of the best conversations I've had have been somebody leaves a comment on Facebook and I pick up the phone or I send them a direct message and I say, hey, let's talk about this. I did that with my mom once and it led to a 3-hour conversation about race that I am not about to forget. But if I had tried to do that within that platform, it would have just compounded misunderstandings. So I think of that as you sort of turn up the dial on how productive your conversation of disagreement is likely to be. And one of the ways you do that is you try to make sure that you have each other's time, and someone's not rushing out the door. You have each other's full attention, which on social media, you don't know if they're, on their way to the bus or, I don't know, just only spending 10% of their attention on you in this exchange, right? You also want to have as much embodiment as you can, people's gestures and tone. One thing I've noticed is in conversations like this, people almost never think of this, but there's always little bits of laughter, little smiles, little cracks. It doesn't even make it on the transcript. But you know how important it is, right? It's the way that we share a sense of wanting to connect and of wanting to get each other. And you don't want to lose that. So turn up those dials as much as you can. And you're likely to have more success on something that's very difficult.
That's great advice. Another thing that you wrote about that I thought was very insightful was the need to have bridging conversations, self-fueling and bonding that help to build trust. Could you just briefly explain what a bridging conversation is? Because it's not, when I read it, I was like, oh, I get it, but I hadn't thought of it that way. I'm going to probably be saying that a lot. I hadn't thought of it that way. But, explain more about bridging.
So, sorting, othering, and siloing, the SOS, the call for help, it's the way that I sum up how we got to where we are. And bridging is how we get out. A bridging conversation, people tend to talk about talk very dismissively. We're not going to talk our way out of this. I'm tired of talking. But, conversation is extraordinary. I think of each conversation has its own unique fingerprint. It has never happened before. It will never happen again, right? It's you and me and them, whatever, in this moment at this time, with us in these moods, having just done whatever we did, on the way to whatever we're going to do. It's an extraordinary moment of intersection and the sorts of things that you learn. One of the best things about conversation is how unpredictable they are. This is what makes them so scary. Terrifying. In the journalism world, there's a lot of highfalutin sources that try to avoid real-time interviews because even if they're really practiced and whatnot, what if in a conversation they say something they didn't mean to say? That's how powerful conversation can be, right? We don't know what's going to happen. So a bridging conversation is, people coming together. They are different. They might have different perspectives, and you're able to calibrate. You're able to see the humanity in each other kind of meet on a certain plane. And then once enough of those threads are tied, something pretty magical can happen if you start talking about really difficult topics, where if there's enough trust built and enough warmth, it is self-fueling, it can start kind of moving on its own. Then you can, bring something up and get curious and learn how the other person thinks of it and go, that's really interesting. Here's what I hear you saying. I see it very differently. Can I tell you why? And the other person goes, okay, sure. But maybe in another context, that person would have been like this. Heck no, right? So conversations have this power to open us up, and a lot of awesome things can flow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the things that is probably the most impactful to me from your book was, and I tell people this all the time when we talk about, I never thought of it that way, was when you went on the road trip, you and others from Seattle in March of 2017. And this was after the election, and you went to Sherman County, Oregon. And talk more about why you did that and what happened. It was magical.
Oh, yeah. So this was right after the 2016 election. We had just started the Evergrey newsletter, and part of our mission was we had these 5 values: be curious, honest, useful, bold, and inclusive. So that morning of November 9th, a lot of our readership, a lot of the city is blue and Democrat and completely depressed. I mean, just dead, right? And so there was this kind of conversation about, well, how are we going to be curious if we don't even have anyone to be curious with? A lot of folks told us, we don't know anyone who voted for Trump. I don't even know any Republicans. What's going on? Which is sort of, an issue too. It's like, but so we ended up finding this interactive map that you put in the county that you're in the United States, and it spits out the nearest county to yours that voted exactly opposite in the presidential election. So it turned out that for King County, it was Sherman County, Oregon, a county of about 2,000 on the banks of the Columbia River, and so we're like, all right. And so we wrote to our readership and said, hey, if we were, I don't know, if we managed to find a way to bring these two worlds together, would some of you want to be a part of it? And a surprising number of people said, yeah, I think we would. So one thing led to another, and I still can't believe this worked. But we found and partnered with a man who's now a dear friend, Sandy McNabb, a longtime agricultural agent out of Sherman County who knows everyone. His family's been there since the 1890s. He's even got McNabb Lane in the middle of a bunch of windmills and wide open wheat fields. Really cool. And he knows everybody. And so he helped us get 16 people from Morrow, Oregon, population roughly 290, so it's pretty good penetration. And then we drove about 19 people from King County. It was 5-hour drive on a Saturday. I mean, people needed to be really committed to this, and we made so clear, this is not about convincing anyone of anything. If you are not coming on this trip because you are curious and you want to understand and you want to meet real people, then this is not for you. And even still, my co-founder and I prepared for the worst. What if it just goes bonkers and people start yelling at each other? But after it was done, what I couldn't believe is what I was so afraid of. Why was I so scared? Why was I so sure that this was going to be so hard? And I know why. It's because all the messages we get is that this is impossible. It's not. Extraordinary conversations, and I can dig into a couple of things we learned.
Yeah,
okay?
Please do.
One example of something that was really powerful is there was a woman, Laura, who at the time was 20, in her early 20s, and she went because she just feels she's curious. She didn't know anyone else on the trip. She went from Seattle, and she didn't know a single Republican in her life at all. Had barely left the city, nothing. And she wondered, she held what is a very common assumption in divided political times, which is that if someone opposes what you support, they must hate what you love, right? She voted against Donald Trump because, well, gosh, she wants to protect the environment. She wants to protect LGBTQ rights and civil rights and all these things. So everyone who voted for Trump must hate those things. And so she felt that, as I think a lot of people did. But what am I missing? What am I missing? I feel like I should be missing something. So she went on that trip really not knowing anything and spending the 5 hours just staring out the window at the rolling fields until we got there. When we got there, there was a farmer named Darren who was super tall, 6'9", and he stands up at one point and he tells us all about something called the Waters of the United States rule, being a main reason that he voted for Trump. Raise your hand if you've heard of the Waters of the United States rule. Oh my gosh, I'm so impressed. I see 3 hands. None of us had heard of it. And the Waters of the United States rule is this federal regulation, this federal definition that basically determines whether a body of water can be considered, a federally regulated, right? Like if it's a body of water, then the government has to have some role in it. Well, turns out there's been some close calls where interpretations of the waters of the United States rule might mean that if it rains really heavily on your farm and you happen to have sort of a valley and suddenly there's a pond, it's not your land anymore. So, also, in Sherman County, when they grow wheat, the rows and rows of wheat that they grow have the little mounds in between them are called furrows. So there's also a lot of concern that, wait a second, if all those furrows fill up with water, what happens to my fields? Again, this may sound absurd, but if you start Googling a little bit, like, there's been close call. So all the farmers nodded their heads like, yeah, we weren't going to trust Democrats on this, because they don't even know about it. They don't even talk about that, right? So that ended up being, Laura told me, and this was shared by many others on that trip, that was a reason I didn't even know existed. I hadn't even considered that there might be reasons that are not my own about things that don't matter to me at all. It was like seeing an equation and realizing you don't have all the variables. But now that you've gone and talked to people, you've found some of them. And so now things make sense.
Yeah, it's such a great story. And you mentioned with Sandy, the gentleman, that you actually went back another time, right? Mm-hmm. And met with him.
He's great.
He drove you around like on his tractor, and it was just an amazing...
On a Subaru Outback.
Sorry, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Right.
Which is illustrative. I even wrote about the assumptions that I had. Right. I assumed that we would drive around hearing country music. Yeah. But no, it was like my favorite soft rock growing up.
Right, that's right.
We even talked about it, Sandy and I, in the car. It's like, Sandy, I had all these assumptions about you, and you had all these assumptions about me. And that's what it's all about, correcting our assumptions.
And related to that, there was some research you talked about how you make assumptions about what people have in their refrigerator reflects their political views.
Right.
Talk a little bit about that.
Did anyone see this in the New York Times? New York Times did this popular interactive quiz around the 2020 election. They actually took photographs of people's refrigerators all around the country and knew on the back end whether that refrigerator belonged to a Biden voting household or a Trump voting household. And so, I mean, this was fascinating. And they had folks online, take a quiz, and they'd be given a photo, and can you guess which of these it was? And I took that quiz starting to think, like, well, I know this is supposed to just test my stereotypes, so let me just let loose and see what happens. So I started to make really stupid rules for myself, right? Like, well, if there's almond milk or oat milk, it's definitely Biden. And if I see like Coca-Cola or Kool-Aid, that must be Trump. Like, stupid. Where does that even come from, right? I have no idea. I just let the stereotypes fly. And sure enough, I was as wrong as everybody else. There is absolutely nothing you can, these shortcuts we think we make about people and their decisions are just so ridiculous. So I wrote in the book about a moment when I came to visit Sandy and I brought him a growler of Rachel's ginger beer from Seattle. And I put it in his fridge, right? And I told myself, like, would people now think this was a Biden voting fridge just because I put a thing of, like, how ludicrous is this,
That's such a great story. In the final chapter, you address the importance of honesty in conversations. And you also suggest what I thought was some really practical advice, which is, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but you can probably talk about it a little bit more, restating what you heard someone say to make sure you heard it correctly. And I think as a journalist, we try to do that because we want to make sure that we're getting accurate information from people. So we do say that back to them, but maybe people don't tend to practice that in conversations. And what's a good kind of rule of thumb to use for that?
Yeah, I've learned even more about this point since joining Braver Angels, the nonprofit that I'm part of. There's a table outside.
Yeah, shameless plug. There's a table with Braver Angels out there.
But among the practices of Braver Angels leadership within the nonprofit and volunteers, we have tens of thousands of volunteers around the country, is what we call questions of clarification. So after somebody presents something in a meeting, first we have questions of clarification. There's no criticisms, there's no complaining, there's no sharing your own opinion, no. First, it must be a question of clarification. When you said this, did you mean this or this, right? So it's the same spirit of it. A lot of times we skip that. And we listen in the course of a conversation and we hear something, and our brain layers on a set of assumptions on whatever we heard. And then we just accept that, create our judgments, and move on. Instead of going, wait, when you say this, did you mean this? Right? And just checking our assumptions. And you might find that, there's just so much that we don't question in that. So it's a really, really great step. The point of that chapter, honesty, is that if we are not honest with each other, and if we're not open, what's the point of being curious? You can ask questions all day, but people don't feel secure sharing who they really are with you or what they really believe. And one of the best ways that you can demonstrate your sincere interest in understanding people is clarifying. And I can't tell you how important that is, how important of a step, and how many times I've corrected. So even if you just say back to you, so let me make sure I understand. So for you, you were mugged, on a trip, and for that really animated your view of gun control and gun regulation because of this and this and this, and you're concerned about that. Is that right? Yeah, exactly, right? And when the other person goes, yeah, and you've really gotten them. One other thing I'll say is that on the trip to Sherman County, we were planning the structure of the conversations we would have, and we thought we were so smart. In the introductions, we'll pair people off, someone from Sherman County, someone from King County, and they'll talk to each other, and then the Sherman County person will introduce the King County person, and vice versa, and then we'll just go on. Sounds nice, right? Well, I talked to an expert on focus groups across, distrust, and he was like, do not do that. Don't you dare. Because the second somebody gets somebody wrong, publicly, they're checked out and it's over for them. Like, oh, good point. The worst thing is to be misunderstood.
Yeah, that's really true. We are going to move into something that, caveat for all of you, Monica said we came up with this idea, but it's never quite done it this way before, so we're going to see how it goes. But we thought it was a good idea, so we'll see what happens. We're calling this a mini curiosity workshop. And we actually have 2 volunteers from the audience who are going to come up and help us, Alan and Jamie. If you could come up to the stage, please. And we're going to move to the outside.
Yeah. Let's hear it for Alan and Jamie being
Yes.
brave right now. Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Hi. I haven't seen you in forever.
Hello.
Nice to see you. Hi, Alan. Nice to meet you. Hello. All right. So we have. Well, you'll keep me posted on timing, right?
I will.
Okay. Great. So we're gonna walk Alan and Jamie through a couple of things. There's an issue on which they disagree, right? That we're gonna have them explore together a bit. But we'll start really innocently. We'll start by just practicing curiosity. So curiosity is a cognitive, thing that we all come equipped with. We can all do it. When people tell you that some people are more curious than others, don't believe them. Curiosity is a practice, not a personality trait. The way curiosity works is when you are aware of a gap between what you know and what you want to know. It's a craving for knowledge. But unlike hunger or thirst, you're hungry until you eat, you're thirsty until you drink. You're only curious about something until you get distracted and think about something else. So it's about keeping your attention, minding the gap between what you know and what you want to know. So what we're going to do is just have you to experience what that's like when you're really laser focused on minding the gap. So I take it you 2 already know each other?
We have met.
Yes.
You have met? Okay.
Just over there.
All right. So I want each of you to take a turn, and it's just going to be a minute or 2. And here's what you're going to do. You're going to just ask, so one of you will go first. Let's say you go first, Jim. You're going to ask Alan just questions just to get to know him. And I want you to answer fairly briefly, right? Just answer the question, just short. And then I want you to ask a follow-up question only based on what he said. So in other words, this is about make the thread go as far as you can before you have to come up and start a new thread about Alan, right? So I'll suggest some questions. You can say, Alan, what's your favorite thing to eat? Or well, what's a place that you love in the world? Or in Edmonds, what's your favorite spot? What's something you love to do? Just get curious, and as you hear him answer, see if you can find the gap in your mind. What do I not know? What am I missing? Ooh, tell me more about that. Tell me more about that, and ask a question. So let's do that just real quick. Like, I'll tell you when to stop. I guess I do have a timer. Okay, so you ready? Yeah. You ready to try this out? Okay, let me just put up a little timer. That way we know it's kind of even. Okay. All right. So turn to Alan and ask your first question.
Tell me about your best vacation ever.
Ooh. My first trip to Kauai. Going to the largest pool in Hawaii, staying at a resort, and meeting the most interesting bartender in the world.
Okay, stop there. What's your next question?
Why was he interesting?
First was his name. It was unbelievable. His name was Woogie.
Did his mother give him that name?
Good Lord, no.
What was the backstory of his name?
I think it was a nickname when he was young. I don't think he blamed his mother, but it may have been another sibling.
So what else was interesting about Hawaii? You talked about pools. Did you swim with the dolphins or turtles?
I didn't swim with the dolphins, although I did swim a long ways.
What's a long way?
The long ways was from the beach at La Willy Willy Harbor. I can't remember the name of it. Lots of
I'm
vowels.
seeing a theme.
Right. Out to where the cruise ships come in. So it was quite a jaunt.
Okay, that's a perfect stopping point. All right, so now I want you to switch. So I want you to practice the same thing. So ask her, that was great. Ask her a question, something about herself, and then just try to take that thread as far as you can. Okay, ready?
Yes.
Go.
Hi, Jamie.
Hi.
Did you grow up in Edmonds, or are you from somewhere else?
I'm from Los Angeles.
Is that hard to say?
It's hard to say in Edmonds.
Oh, that's fascinating. There's a question there. Come on. That's great.
Would it be easier to say it somewhere else?
Yeah, I think, when I moved here to the Pacific Northwest, it was sort of the peak of the anti-California thing. So I look Norwegian enough, so I kind of got under the wire. But I tried not to share it too much. But if you go someplace else like Chicago or New York or Atlanta, it's a lot easier to be from LA, Lower Alabama.
So, if I understand correctly, you think that has peaked. It's easier now to say it in Edmonds?
I
Than in
do. I
California?
think that Edmonds is becoming more diverse. I think as the tech industry has grown more and people are moving, as you say, out of Seattle, I think they're coming up here for good or for bad. It is a fact. So I think there's more openness to people not being necessarily born and raised in Edmonds.
Perfect. That's great. Okay, so in 1 minute and 15 seconds.
That's a lot of information.
Yeah, you went from what was your starting question? It was, are you from Edmonds? Are you from Edmonds to California and what's changed and demographics, right? And your first question to Alan was
Vacation.
vacation.
Best vacation.
Right, and we covered bartender nicknames and swims and all kinds of fun stuff. So, all right, so now you got to experience a bit of that. So real quick, just what was that like to listen with the intention of minding the gap?
I enjoy that. It's there's an entertainment value, frankly.
Say more about that.
If I'm simply trying to find the answer of something, there's always more than just the answer. There's always more. So, a person's story that they come with, what built that answer for virtually any question that you ask.
Yeah.
Short of maybe math. It's
There's no final answers in humanity, right?
Yeah, no, it's enjoyable.
Yeah, cool. Anything to add, Jane?
I think that you see there's a lot more in common. So he talked about swimming, and I like to swim. So that would be a common thing for me. And we might be able to find a connection. And I'd say, there's a group that gets out here on Sunday mornings. And
So I'm glad you brought that up. When I run a longer curiosity workshop, and the instructions on this type of exercise are you are not allowed to interrupt, you cannot comment on what the person said, you must only ask another question. And inevitably someone raises their hand after to say how much that hurt, Because as soon as someone says something that you have in common with, I went to that school too, I know exactly the place you're talking about. So people often tell me, look, this is hopeless. We're wired to be divisive, but we're wired to connect too, right? We're looking for common ground. It's wired in. It's built into our programming. Okay, so now I wonder if Teresa, could you give us the overview on the issue, like in an objective way?
Yeah, an objective way.
Yes.
I will try my best.
Okay.
So the issue we've chosen to talk about tonight is whether schools in our area should have police officers who are known as school resource officers as part of the school day. That is has been pretty common for many years here, but our local school district recently decided to remove them. There were concerns from some parents that having police officers in the schools were not necessarily a good thing for certain kids and might even instill some trauma in those kids. And there are folks on the other side who think that it's a way for everybody to get a better relationship building with a police officer. So there are obviously at least two sides or more to that debate, discussion. So that's the issue.
Okay. So I'm going to explain a bit about what we're going to do and how, right? And then invite you to participate. So what we'll do is I'll invite Jamie and Alan to give each just 1 minute on their position on this and be as honest as you're comfortable being and, not necessarily argumentative, just expose, just say what you think, right? In about a minute. And then, and they're each going to take turns doing this whole stream. Then we're going to have the other person ask questions of experience and questions of concern, because these are two particularly powerful questions in a conversation about disagreement. Questions of experience are trying to get at the story, the events, the things that have been lived that animate a person's perspective on something. So things like, the best opening question probably for that is something like, what personal experiences influence your point of view on this? Has anything, there's all these ways to get at it, right? But basically you're trying to turn the other person into a storyteller. Now, as a clue for the person who'll be answering these questions, one of the great ways to answer a question like that, or even to share yourself and your perspective, we don't do this enough, is as an issue comes up, pay attention to the images that come up in your mind. Often there'll be images from the past, your past. Pay attention to why you're thinking about those things. Why do those scenes in your life come up? Might some of them be okay for you to share? Because there's research that shows we understand each other's perspectives more powerfully and more efficiently when we share them via our own story, rather than my opinion versus your opinion, and then you'll just repeat your opinion, and I'll just repeat mine. We'll do that all day long, except at a louder volume. It doesn't really work. So that's the experience questions. If you hear each other say things like, oh man, yeah, it's like that one time, you go, wait, what happened? What happened? What happened next? What did you think? Pull the details out of a story when you get one. The second type of question is questions of concern. So questions of concern are really powerful because they get at people's values. They get at what they care about. So again, we tend to get stuck thinking that everything that we agree or disagree on is all coming down to logic and reason. Lots of it, does, but plenty of it is really not about that at all. It's about what we're afraid of and what we're hopeful for. So that's where concerns come out. As a journalist, one of my favorite questions to ask is just, what concerns you about this issue? And then when they finish telling me their answer, I go, what else? And sometimes what people will do is, as they begin to share concerns, they'll share the concerns that they've heard before, but then you keep asking, and you get to their unique concerns. And it gets more and more real the longer that you hear the questions of concern. And then again, what you're really doing is you're gathering material to get more curious. Tell me more about this, tell me more about that, what do you mean by this, then what happened, right? And you're fleshing out the story of this person's perspective. So, we're throwing this at you real fast. But the rules on this one are, whoever is asking the questions, ask questions of experience and concern. Feel free to ask questions of clarification if something is unclear. Do not judge. Do not comment, and do not offer your own opinion. Okay? Another tip I'll give is that, you might think, the only way to do this right is to never judge, never have any assumptions. That's impossible. That's not something we're striving for. The trick is actually to notice your judgments and turn them into questions. Oh, gosh, he must be one of those so-and-sos. Is he one of those so-and-sos? Hang on, let me ask about something that can get me to that, right? So notice your judgments and turn them into a curious question. Notice the gap between what you know and what you don't know. Be humble that you don't know it, because you're just getting to know this, right? You don't know. So, okay, how much time do we have?
15 minutes.
Great. Okay, so what I'm gonna give you a good 4 minutes each. Yeah. Okay, who wants to start answering the question? Who wants to start giving the opinion and then answering the question? You?
You decide.
Up to you.
You give your opinion first.
Okay. All right, so you're gonna do 1 minute of just sharing your perspective as comfortably and as honestly as you can. And then there'll be 4 minutes of asking questions of experience and concern without judgment and without sharing your own opinion back. Ready?
Yes.
Tell us what you think about school resource officers. Go.
I'm biased. I was a school resource officer. Thank you. And so I'm a huge proponent of school resource officers in the schools. I believe that they serve several functions that are central to the mission of policing in the first place, by being involved in the community called the schools.
And feel free to talk to her.
Yeah, okay. But you're talking
Sorry,
about
I'm over here.
So without it, there's a big gap then in terms of interaction between police and the community. So that's a big piece. And I think that the more segregation we have with police in the community, the more stereotypes and misinformation and assumptions can be made about them. At least that's been my experience.
That's good. That's a minute. All right, you got plenty to go on. Ready?
This is going to be hard to ask.
Yeah, and remember what we learned in the curiosity exercise, right? Just see how far the thread goes, see what details you can bring out. So experience and concern, and go.
Have you ever talked to someone who doesn't agree with you?
Yes.
And what do they say?
It would usually come up in the form of a parent. Usually it was a parent, but sometimes it was a student. And if I was going to speak with a student about an incident, that's the easy example. I have had parents contact me and tell me not to speak to their child because they don't allow their children to speak to the police.
And how does that make you feel?
Disappointed. There's the obvious aspect of my job. I want to find out information so that I can do my job, solve a crime, prevent a crime, things like that. Maybe help make connections to resource of all things. A school resource officer, resource is central to the idea.
What kind of resources? I can see your point of view where you don't want people to feel triggered. Is that a mistake?
Oh, if you're leading to a question of clarification or something that pulls details, then no.
Okay. What kind of resources do you wish people knew you provided, but you think they don't know? That was a badly asked question.
But it's a good
That was a
question.
good question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I don't have a comprehensive list, but I can think of some ideas. There are often children, or not just children, people, teachers, custodians, people in the schools, just like in the broader community, who don't understand how the police can help in a violent home, the domestic violence situation, or being cyberbullied. There's a role that the police can play in that. Not that it's necessarily the only role or the best role even, but it's a possible one.
That sounds like there's a story in your head there when you talk about domestic violence or cyberbullying. What is that?
There's many. I've had students come to my office and tell me about abuse that's happening in the home. I've had students come and tell me about abuse happening at their friend's house. And the student who lived in that home would have never, ever spoken to the police. And, you can't always help that, but you can try. And if it's not me directly by starting an investigation, I can refer the other student to a counselor or another social worker in the school or a friend.
So try asking about concerns and hopes since we're down to the final minute.
Can I phone a friend?
Sure. Given that this is ultimately a discussion about where one stands on this divisive issue, you can ask what ultimately concerns you about this scenario happening versus that one, something like that.
So if we lost a school resource officer, which apparently we don't have them anymore, what do you feel? What concerns you? What do you think is missing now?
Two things. One is the identity of police in the mind of the community. I saw this happen in Boise. They had resource officers for a number of years. They took them away. There's some anecdote about how crime went through the roof and things like that. Whether that's accurate or not, I can't say. But I can say when they put them back in, things got a lot better in the community. And that story was told on every corner for a long time. So
we're out of time, but I'd love to hear your second one, because you said there were two. So or did you already give the second?
No, and the second one is responsiveness to crisis. So, everyone thinks about the school shooter or something like that, some big incident. And there is an element of it would be better if there is somebody on site who has the tools and training to address a situation like that.
Okay, give a hand to Jamie and her questions.
This is a lot harder than it looks.
Right.
You did great.
Okay, well, let's flip it around, and then if we have a couple minutes to talk about it. Okay, so we just saw this. Now, what's going to be extra challenging is you two do disagree, right? But this exercise is curiosity, not judgment. So we're not arguing here. We don't have time for that. We don't have time to debate. We're exposing, right? So now you're going to be asking the questions. And again, questions of experience, questions of concern. Thank you for being first at bat to give some solid models. And questions of clarification are great. Pulling out details, great. Bring your curiosity where it comes in, but keep that focus on learning what you don't yet know and pulling out what you can. So, all right, and you get a minute to give your perspective. And please, I would ask, don't respond to what he said. Make it independent, yeah? As if you were saying it without us already having talked about it. Okay, go.
I think that when people have concerns about school resource officers, I think as a mom, I think of Uvalde. I think of a whole lot of resource officers who didn't do very much. I think about the fact that maybe one resource officer, I would like to see that money go towards counselors who have more experience holistically. And I try to be very mindful of the fact that many people come from communities where police officers don't have the best reputation in their families. I value police officers, don't get me wrong. What I see is an opportunity for officers to engage in the community, maybe at Stuff the Backpack Day.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Alan, any questions before the questions? Questions of experience, questions of concern?
Right.
Good?
I'll give it a shot.
All right, we'll do 4 minutes. Go.
Have you had experience with police officers? That's an awful question.
Feel free to restate if there's another way you'd like to state it. Yeah.
Rephrase.
That was great. And by the way, conversation's messy. And when we give ourselves, honestly, when we give ourselves the space to be like, can I just say that again? That came out wrong or whatever. That's good. That's good.
I think that's a fair question because, to be honest, I have had very positive interactions with police officers, but I'm also a white female, And I work a lot with people of color, and they have not. So I personally have a very positive relationships with officers and the legal system. But I think I'm one of the few.
Can you tell me about maybe some conversations you've had with people who've had poor experiences in the schools or around the schools?
Well, my son had a friend, his best friend was black, and he talked about how they would go places together. And my son is just as white as I am, and they would be treated and followed and reacted to differently. They were the same kid, one just happened to be a different color. And that was surprising to him, and so it was surprising to me. And I want to be very mindful of the fact that I don't have other people's experience. So I think we need to listen, and that's not to say that police officers don't belong in schools. I think there might be a better way to have a conversation, to have the right police officer interacting in a safe way where people feel comfortable.
I'm going to shift to the other half. Mm-hmm. What would be your concern about the police being in the schools? What's your concern about that?
My concern? I think it's fake safety.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think about all the school shootings and the metal detectors and all of these things that we're doing to protect our children, and it's fake safety. I think that's, I want it to be real. I want somebody to come in and shut the door from that guy from Uvalde. I want somebody to be brave enough to do that. I think that a lot of police officers, you guys are human.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
Yeah. Gosh, I'm right there.
Okay,
Yeah, that's good.
that was powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Give us a hand. So before we close out this portion, I mean, we didn't have a lot of time, right? So what we did was focus on getting the material out. To give a sense of what would have happened without this kind of structure, what is likely to have happened, is you probably saw the moments where argumentation would have probably come right. Fake safety, what the hell is that? What do you mean by that? That's, what?
Like fake news?
What? Like, there could have been so many moments where that had happened. Well, I just think that's wrong. Well, what about blah, 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 right? So to interrupt and get in the way before people have a chance to explain and illustrate and tell a story, right? And I don't know if you all noticed how humanizing both their perspectives were. You talked about, well, maybe my concern is not that deep, I'm white, but I've had conversations, right? And my concern is sort of extended to some people I know whom I have talked to and connected with. And you, of course, you've been in this position. You've seen how, from your perspective, quite useful, right? So you carry that experience. You carry experience. And what that did to humanize a conversation that might otherwise have been logic versus logic, reason versus reason, screamed more and more loudly until we all go home. So thank you both for that. What would happen next is the tougher part in some ways, which is the engagement, the challenging. And so we don't have time for that, but the best thing is to save that until after something like 8 minutes of information exchange, human information exchange, gets a chance to happen. Can you believe what was exchanged in 8 minutes? So
I just want to say that I appreciate what you've done in the schools with the domestic violence and the cyberbullying. I didn't know that. I'd never thought about it that way. No, but I mean, like, seriously. No, I just didn't know that, and I'm glad that I know that. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
okay, well, thank you
Thank
both.
you.
Thank you both so
Appreciate
very
it.
much. That was amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Move back in. All right. That was quite interesting.
That was really cool. Nice
Yeah.
job, you guys.
Thank you again, Jamie and Alan. Really appreciate it. So now, this is the fun part. We're going to take questions from the audience.
We love questions.
And we have people with mics who are going to be available to go to you when you have a question. So raise your hand and they'll come to you. So get started. You're going to be next.
Come on. Yeah. You mentioned the advantages of listening to a story and then sharing your story. Hey, I wonder about that a little bit, because sometimes when I see that, I think the other person doesn't really care about me. They want to talk about themselves. So could you expand on that a little bit, please?
Oh, interesting. Can you give me an example of how that would play out?
Well, it's just that if somebody's is telling a story and they're explaining what it is, and the other person right away then starts to talk about their own story, then the other person thinks, you don't care about me, you just want to talk about yourself. So that's why I don't, somehow I feel that limits the other person feeling understood.
You're spot on. You're absolutely right. This is one of those things that naturally happens when we come together. We do tend to think about our own piece, and so we want to bring it up soon, especially if we're excited or we're eager to get it out. But as y'all have probably noticed in conversations you've had, when somebody pauses to ask you, tell me more, wow, that must have felt so-and-so, or gives you some curiosity about your experience, you will feel heard. And when it's time for them to tell their story, you will more easily hear them because you feel that you've received the gift of their curiosity you can now reciprocate. And it's a really powerful thing in particular because oftentimes people cannot hear unless they're heard. When it's a particularly difficult topic, they come in already feeling beat up by the world, right? They know that you disagree, shields are up, and so the only way that they're going to soften and begin to explore perspectives with you is if they feel that your interest is genuine and you're not just there to convince them they're wrong or to tell them that they're worse than you or whatever, right? Because we tend to enter these conversations with a sense of superiority if we think we're right. It's not just about the idea. We tend to kind of, dismiss and diminish the other person. And so, yeah, we'll jump in with our own thing because it's time to educate this person, But that's condescension. That's not curiosity. You have a question over here?
Hi, great presentation tonight. My favorite quote so far: "Curiosity is a practice, not a personality trait." It's a good one. I'm an activist on a particular issue, and I'm all about finding common ground. What I find is that my political opponents don't want to have the conversation. In fact, they have a motto of no debate. And so how do you get in the room with someone you disagree with, that you really want to have that interesting conversation with you, and that you feel that society would be better if we had the conversation, and we need to have this conversation, but they don't want to have it with you, and they will not be persuaded to have it with you. All they do is judge and dismiss you.
Oof, yeah, that's tough. So I believe that, and thank you for sharing that, because that is not an uncommon thing. There is a courage in patience. Sometimes it's a long game. The reasons that people don't want to engage is because they feel it's hopeless. They feel there's nothing they can learn from you. And so chances are they have their reasons for believing that, their experiences and their concerns. And they have ruled something out that you want to persuade them, hey, this is an ongoing conversation. Chances are they see you as the opponent as a threat. So there's various things to sort of demonstrate that you can't demonstrate very quickly. That you would hear them, part and parcel with them hearing you. That you are curious what they might think. And what helps the most with this and with so much else that we've been talking about is a relationship. When we talk about bridging. And the most important thing to do with a bridge is to keep it not to cross it. We tend to be very impatient. You know, I'm all ready to talk to my uncle at Thanksgiving, and so let's sit down, and I better get the answers that I need in an hour, or I'm gonna give up on this whole enterprise. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that from people. I tried. You know, I didn't get anywhere. He didn't ask me any questions. He just talked and he was angry. It's like, yeah, well, we can't control each other. We don't know where each other is. I quote this author, Valerie Kaur, about anger. She says, anger is a force that protects that which is loved, which is a way to make anger a cue for curiosity. What are they trying to protect? One of the best ways to diffuse anger in a conversation is as soon as you see someone get animated, you can say, I didn't realize this mattered so much to you. Can you tell me more about what you're concerned about? And just watch their anger leave them. Wow, you're actually gonna listen to me? No way, you know? So watch for those kinds of cues, but it is the long game. And they're in a more rigid place than you are, but it sounds like you're committed to the issue that you're fighting for, and that's part of the long fight, right? Because if persuasion cannot be effective in our society, we're doomed. And sometimes it's the long game with people until they are willing to trust, and trust is hard to build, but worth trying.
Yeah, you said we could go right here. It's on.
Okay. Yes, I have just a kind of quick question / just, I don't know if there's a clear-cut answer to this. I noticed that it's harder to have these kind of conversations with people who have had personal, really deep personal experiences with what you are trying to convey, that your message to them. And so my question is, how do you have these conversations, these collaborative conversations, because they have to be collaborative, with people without triggering and dismissing their personal experiences, without triggering their insecurities, or without triggering their past? How do you have these conversations with them and still be able to elaborate how you feel, but not dismiss how they feel?
What a great question. Well, we saw a small model of that up here a little bit earlier, right? Because we learned all at once that Alan was himself an officer in the schools. And so I observed Jamie register that. You know, what will that mean for what kinds of questions she will ask? I also observed Jamie, as she gave her opinions and concerns about police officers, reassure Alan, even at one point, reaching out with her hand, right? It's a gesture of warmth. This is the thing we don't do on social media, darn it, right? It's a gesture of warmth of, I do see you, but I hope you can hear me on this larger concern. So, you know, you can learn by observing how we already are wired to do some of these things. Now, to get to a deeper part of your question, a lot of times, you know, we ourselves are in positions where there's no way we're going to talk about this or this or this, because it is so intensely personal that a disagreement on an issue feels like a rejection of me, right? A lot of identity type of based issues, right? Whether it's LGBTQ or racial, or, I mean, you name it, immigration. There's all kinds of things that for some people it might be so personal and so tender. So in that situation, nobody can be forced to have a conversation. Nobody should be forced to have a conversation they don't want to have. It is up to each of us to decide when we're ready and when we're comfortable. And if it gets too tender, we always need to feel good being able to say, you know what, I think I've hit my stopping point on this. I find that naming an emotion is a really great way to just communicate it and be able to do whatever it leads you to do. You know, this is making me particularly upset. It's hard to articulate the reasons, but I need to take a break. I think this is where we stop. Allowing people to do that, observe how they're sitting and what sort of gestures they have. If they seem uncomfortable, then offer that, you know what, maybe we can talk about this again later. Let's go get a drink, or let's go do something, or what have you. So a lot of it depends. And if there's a follow-up, but is there a follow-up?
Yeah, I just have something.
Yeah, please.
So part of growth is being comfortable, being uncomfortable.
That's right.
And so how do you break that? How do you find that fine line of
Yeah.
being willing to make someone uncomfortable, but at the same time, because that's important.
That's tough, right? And it's a judgment call. I mean, a lot of times I feel like people often want, with things like this, the one thing that is standard and that applies to all of these conversations. It doesn't exist. everything is relationship by relationship, conversation by conversation. You're absolutely right, though. And to give a great example, going back to activism, there's an author, Jonathan Rauch, who was part of the same-sex marriage movement and was, with that through like a big victory not that long ago. And he talks about how there was a point where the last thing that allies of this movement wanted to do was talk to people who just believed that something was wrong with gay people. That we can't have gay marriage. The last thing you want to do is be in that space. But several of them did it anyway and talked to them. And one of the things he says that they learned, thanks to their being able to do that, have the courage to do that, is they learned that a lot of folks who were extremely skeptical about this had loved ones who were gay. And the question that gave them the "I never thought of it that way" moment was, wouldn't you want someone you love to be in a loving relationship themselves? And so he says that we just saw the light bulb go off, and people would, you could see them wrestle with where their values were leading them and where their love was leading them. And you could see those two things wrestle. And then little by little, he said it was like those light bulbs turned into just a room full of light. And so if they hadn't done that, if they had just said, I can't be in the room, I can't be in that conversation, then how would that movement have known what that entry ramp was going to be? So it's challenging, though. It's not something we can ask of everybody, but thank goodness that enough people are able to put themselves in a vulnerable place so that they can be seen. So hopefully that helps, but there's so many millions of ways to answer everything that you asked. I think I drank 2 waters. Sorry. We'll keep going on this one.
In your book,
Where are we?
I'm right here.
Oh, hi. Yeah.
In your book, you stress the idea of looking at other people's perspectives as a bridge. And now that we have the holidays in our rearview mirror, pretty much, and I'm sitting with some family and friends, we've talked quite a bit about how in the same family, experiencing the same experiences as we've grown up, and yet somehow have divergent views on the things that happened when we were in the same room together years later.
Isn't that amazing?
Any tips on
On what? What's the objective here? Tips on what? Yeah, like what would be the objective? On what? On reconciling the views? On getting one shared reality? On being able to what is it that you're looking for?
I think, what's drawn me to your book, which I've given to many people, is the idea that there's a person who I love and want to connect with, and yet, for whatever reason, we have these completely divergent views on things that happened in our past that have made us now, as adults, into the people that we are. Do you ignore those misconstrued observations in the past, or what?
Okay, so if I'm hearing you right, the issue is in part that something must be wrong in the way one of you is remembering, and you're pretty sure you know which
Or
one.
both of us, yeah.
Right, and so you want to, is it that you want to kind of you want one truth to be asserted? Is that it?
Yeah, or an agreement of some sort.
You want an agreement, right?
Can be, cannot be.
Yeah.
Except,
I mean, this is, I'm going to lift off a little bit from your situation because, of course, I don't know your situation, but it reminds me of something a bit more universal, which is this notion that oftentimes we want people to affirm a shared reality before they can earn our trust. But it takes trust to build a true shared reality. So what that means is, it's, and I don't know, I don't know your situation. How is a disagreement about what is true getting in the way of a relationship? Is a disagreement about what is true getting in the way of an ongoing conversation that builds a bond or that maintains a bond. That happens a lot. A lot of folks feel that once they hit a wall where someone has just a different set of facts that's just wrong, right? They're like, I know this is wrong, this is dumb. All we know how to do is stop the conversation or try to fight like hell to get them to agree, usually by shouting, because they're just not going to agree. So in this case, I think what a framework that I've found really useful is the conversation about what is true is not the only conversation we can be having. The more important conversation, especially when you clash on what is true, is the conversation about what is meaningful. So what was up here with questions of concern, that's a conversation about what is meaningful, right? Jamie and Alan weren't trading statistics. They weren't checking their notes. They were talking about what is meaningful to them as people. And it's the conversation about what is meaningful that makes people feel heard, and that doesn't rely on total allegiance necessarily to facts. You can get behind the disagreement. So you can try to understand why their eyes in that moment remember it so differently, right? It takes a certain acceptance and respect that they have a different account, which is really hard for people sometimes. Like, but how could you? You have to kind of get past that to be able to have the conversation about what is meaningful. And there might be some truth in their concern that it might actually help you make sense why they see something so differently. But again, I don't know what the situation is. And there could be lots of things, but I hope that's helpful.
It does. Thank you very much for what you do.
We have time for about 2 more questions, so if the people carrying the microphones around could be mindful of that.
Hi, thank you so much for hosting this. This is amazing. I'm so happy to be here. When the question was asked, what am I missing? That really resonated with me. And so when you first said that we're wondering if the person is crazy, stupid, or evil, that really tickled me because I am the only Black woman where I live. And so a lot of times if I have an idea or if I notice that something isn't running smoothly, my Black voice should not be heard. I shouldn't be pointing out that things aren't going smoothly because I'm crazy, I'm evil, or I'm stupid. And so I love that you said that the doors to our mind should be open and that we should be intellectually humble. And also, I was curious about the quote you said there. Did you say that whoever is underrepresented in your mind is overrepresented in your imagination?
Whoever is underrepresented in your life is overrepresented in your imagination.
Yes, and so I imagine that for some people, so like a lot of people where I live never had to interact with a Black person at all.
Right.
So then when they have to interact with me as a Black woman for the first time, they're like, oh, I didn't realize I had a thing against Black people, and now you're talking to me, and you're like my supervisor, and like you're 29 and I'm 60 something and now I have to listen to you. And so I'm really looking forward to taking this information back because I stepped away from the roles I had before. And January 2nd, I became the diversity, equity, and inclusion coordinator for my job because I was like, look, this has to change. My skin color is not gonna turn white. And we have to figure out how to make things work for people of color to exist on this island and feel comfortable and live a happy life. And so as the new diversity, equity, and inclusion coordinator, I'll also work as a liaison for other folks in the community. So this is amazing, and I'm excited to go back next week and practice this workshop with my coworkers and then with our board, and then carry it over to the community. So thank you so much.
Thank you. That's awesome. I know we have very little time, but I want to give a quick comment on that. If only we could be robots who knew what they didn't know, right? We're not. We fill in the blanks with garbage. And a lot of that garbage is provided to us by narratives and media and silos and things that flatten and simplify and exaggerate. The only antidote to that is checking what we're what's coming at us and what we're imagining with real people, interactions with real people. And we have to actually get all that stuff into a place of suspended animation so that we can warmly approach people without those assumptions getting in our way. So thanks again. Do we have time for one more?
Yes, we have time for one more.
Okay, I think I'll take the last one. This comment and question is for Jamie, the volunteers.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Yeah. So appreciate the conversation. It's so powerful. I'm curious. Well, the comment is you say you are from Los Angeles. It's not that difficult to say, and comparing to somebody come from Mexico or China, that's much easier to say. My question to you is, during your conversations up there with Aaron, you say you were a white woman and you have positive experience with police officer. Right across Aaron, who is a white police officer. So my curiosity is, if Aaron were to be a police officer of people of color, would your feelings change?
No, I don't think so. The answer is no.
Can you explain, is there some life experience lead to that conclusion?
Well, I have worked in the county and in the courts, so I see the legal system, all people of all colors and all races. So I have respect for the legal system. Not everybody gets it right inside the legal system, but I think the system has good parts to it, and I respect Aaron's job, and I respect what he does. I think the issue was whether that particular officer belonged in that particular place. And I don't even necessarily know if I disagree with it. I didn't know enough about it, which is what I think the whole purpose was, and I learned something tonight.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for clarifying.
Great. Wow, I didn't expect the audience to be asking each other questions.
Look at that. That was
Awesome.
great. We sparked some curiosity.
really great.
That's what we're here for.
Well, we are at the end, and I want to, first of all, thank all of you for coming tonight, and of course, thank you to Monica for being here and taking the time.
Thanks, everybody.
If you want to do some follow-up work on these curious conversations, there is a table out there with Braver Angels. They do workshops, they do things, because I had asked Monica that question. What happens when people leave and they're all excited and then they don't know what to do next? Braver Angels, that's the answer. So there's a table out there. There is also a table, you may have noticed, from the Edmonds bookshop, our own bookshop, selling Monica's books, and she is going to be signing copies, so that will be something to look forward to. I want to conclude by thanking our sponsors, which include the Edmonds Waterfront Center that allowed us to be in this beautiful building tonight, and the Edmonds Bookshop and the Vita Agency. Amalia, thank you so much for, I don't know where there she is, she's up there. But thank you to Amalia for making the introductions and being part of this. And then Reef Comer Studios, who did our video tonight. This is available on video for folks. We're taping it so that we will have it available on YouTube. I'll share the link out to everybody who came tonight if you want to share it with your friends and neighbors. A lot of people, didn't necessarily couldn't come tonight, but this will be a way for them to see it. So thank you so much for coming out on this important topic. Truly, it resonated, right? You're all here. We had a great discussion, and I hope that it sparks more of this as we go on. So thanks again for coming, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.